All right, it is 9 o'clock, so I'm going to get the class started. So I'm going to start with two questions, of which, I think both of those are important. The first one is a little bit more general, which is why are you in this class in general? So how many people are thinking I'm going to pursue the computer science program? Okay, I would say that's the majority. And if you're not in computer science, are you in some kind of in engineering? Okay. All right. So that's the first question. And let me kind of put some context into this question. So have you guys all heard about, how AI, artificial intelligence, is kind of permeating into everything that is white collar? And computer science or software engineering is pretty much as white collar as it can possibly get. So what is your understanding of the situation? Okay. Have you read any news about that? Yes, go ahead, please. Yeah. All right. So there are a few aspects to what you said. So it's not sustainable in the sense of energy requirement. For one, I mean, there may be other ones too. In other words, some people believe that the way we do GPTs, to be more specific, is going to hit an energy wall, which means at some point we simply do not have a supply of energy that is enough to sustain the growing GPT industry, and it's, at some point that's going to be okay. This is all we can have because we cannot produce any more energy to sustain the data centers. So that is correct. Okay, there's no question about the energy requirement, for GPTs, especially when we are training them. The application is not quite as bad, but it is still consuming, quite a bit of energy. But to kind of not to counter, but to address that particular issue, if there is money to be made, if they can reduce the energy requirement, guess what? They will find a way to reduce the energy requirement. Okay. And also there's Moore's law too. Okay. Does anyone know what is Moore's law? Moore. Moore. Yes. Go ahead. Yes. But exactly how exponentially? Okay, that's okay. But understanding that it is exponential is important. Moore's law used to say every 18 months, a year and a half, transistors will reduce their sizes by 50%. So the consequence of that is energy requirement will also reduce by 50%, but the speed is going to increase by 100% because the smaller the transistor, the faster it can switch its state, and therefore the computers will become faster, networking becomes faster, mass store becomes more dense, so that they can store twice as much. So the trajectory based on Moore's law is every 18 months, everything doubles. Okay, I believe that period of 18 months is now 2 years. Well, big deal. By the time you graduate with a computer science degree, we would have gone through two of Moore's law cycles, which means everything is going to be four times, 400%, quadrupled. Okay, energy requirement compared to what we need today will be a quarter of what it used to be. Okay, and that's assuming that we don't really do much else, okay, in terms of the LLM or the GPT technology, the way we construct those things. We are not taking into consideration of the distillation of GPTs. So DeepSeek is a distilled version of some of the existing GPTs, and as a result, the energy requirement to run DeepSeek is a whole lot less compared to, let's say, ChatGPT, which is not a distilled model. So there are things, there are technologies and approaches where we can potentially reduce the energy requirement, which also means we may not be hitting the energy wall as quickly as people think that we will. Just to put things in perspective, I am old by comparison. Okay, relatively speaking, I'm old because I'm about 6 years away from retiring. So, uh, how this all going to turn out is not going to impact me all that much. Okay, but it will impact you because you guys are just starting out. Okay. But in my years, okay, of being a student and then being in the industry, there was one time, okay, I was in grad school at the time, where they think we cannot make transistors smaller than 1 micron. Okay, since we have some engineering students here, what exactly is 1 micron? You can look it up on your phone. I mean, I know you guys know how to do that. You can even use your voice and talk to ChatGPT on the phone. It's like, hey, what is 1 micron? Okay, 1 micron is 1 millionth of a meter. That is really small. So at one time, semiconductor industry thought, we cannot make transistors any smaller than that. So tell me, if you have an Apple M4 or an Apple MacBook that uses the M4 chip, what is the transistor size on a Mac 4, on an M4, which is kind of like the processor, but it also has RAM and other stuff in it too. So what is the transistor size? It is 3 nanometer. Okay. So how does 3 nanometer compare to 1 micron? 1 nano is 1,000th of a micron. In other words, in the 90s, we thought that we cannot make transistors any smaller. Now we are 300th of the size that was thought to be the barrier. Okay. So I'm hoping this will put things in perspective because technology kept marching forward, even though at multiple times in the short history we have observed, okay, barriers that we thought were there, and we go like, oh, okay, we cannot make it any better than this, and it got overcome. Okay, so I wouldn't count on AI technology to fall flat on its face by the time you graduate. Instead, I would probably keep an eye on, how it is progressing. Okay, just so that you have a realistic expectation of how things will be by the time you graduate. Does that make sense? Okay, so I know this has nothing, absolutely nothing to do with BNF, okay, which I made you guys study. Um, so given that AI is not going to go away by the time you graduate and need to go find a job, okay, how are you going to convince someone to hire you? I know some of you are thinking, okay, I just need to get my bachelor's degree in computer science, and there's going to be an AI job, of $500,000 per year waiting for me. That is not going to happen, period. Now, if you graduate and you immediately land a job that is $500,000, let me know, okay? Because that would be truly impressive. So, what is happening these days? What's happening to the entry level positions at different corporations in terms of entry level software developers? What is happening? The requirements have gone up, and companies are letting go of not only entry level, but even mid level software engineers. You can just look it up online. Okay, this is not the kind of stuff that I can make up because you can quickly look up online and find out. With larger companies, Salesforce in the Bay Area is one, Meta is another one, Oracle is another one. So all of these larger corporations have been reducing their workforce in terms of software engineers because they are all banking on one thing: the artificial intelligence, specifically GPT technology, will be able to replace people. Okay. So what do you feel about that? I did not ask what do you think about it. I asked how do you feel about it, which is different. Yes. Well, on one hand, so there's a little bit of anxiety. So you're feeling some anxiety about the future, uncertainty, right? Okay, that's okay. That's actually healthy because that makes you aware of the situation, and it also pushes you, energizes you to try to do something so that it doesn't happen to you. Okay, so that you still learn what you need in order to get a job. Okay, and that's my job here. Okay, that is my job here is to try my best to anticipate what you will need in order to land a job and be successful in your career. It's not just, oh, I got my job and then 2 months later I got fired. Okay, that would not be helpful. All right, I hope this all kind of makes sense, as a kind of setting up the backdrop of this class, and also in many ways how I am going to teach it. So are we good so far? All right, cool. Has anyone tried out the GPT TA that I have kind of put online? No one. I am shocked. I thought people would jump on it, go like, okay, let me try this out. This is kind of fun. Okay, so this is the GPT. It is linked from Canvas. So if you go onto Canvas and you go to course information, it is right here. Chat GPT TA, and TA stands for Teaching Assistant. Okay, so it is AI, okay, but it is not AI in the sense that it is based on the modules that I have written, that you are supposed to have read and understood. So the knowledge base of this particular GPT is actually human created. It is created by me. So what the GPT is doing is when you cannot find me, like 2 a.m. in the morning, and you're trying to think, how do I parse this, input and based on the BNF representation? Okay, I'm sure that thing is kind of bothering. It will keep bothering you for a while. I'm not giving you my cell phone number. You're not going to call me. You're not going to text me. Okay, I will not reply even if you did. Okay, but you can use the GPT. It is always available. So what I know about the subject matter related to this class is encoded into the knowledge base in the GPT. Now, is it going to do a perfect job every single time? Probably not. Is it going to do a reasonable job so that you can get some quick questions answered and get some concepts clarified? I think so. Okay, so give it a try. Okay, if you want to. There are other resources on campus that can help you. Downstairs on the first floor, we have MESA, MESA. So they do have some requirement to become a full-fledged member. They also have half memberships. So, but check it out because they have tutors. And those tutors are not only tutoring like CISP 300. Some of those tutors can tutor CISP 300 and all the other CISP courses on top of calculus, on top of physics, and so on. So it is based on what classes each tutor has already taken to determine what that person can tutor. So it is a really good resource. Okay, if you're on in a STEM program, not even just computer science, it is a good resource. So I would check it out maybe like right after class today. Are we good so far with that particular resource? Okay, all right. So with that all said, I'm hoping that you have read the syllabus. I'm going to assume that you have read the syllabus so that you know the expectations of this class, including when I said do not use ChatGPT or AI in the discussion, I meant exactly that. Do not use ChatGPT or AI or any generative AI to answer those questions. Okay? So, all right. And a few other things. This is the link to my YouTube channel. As I said a little bit earlier, I record all my lectures. Until this semester, After the pandemic ended, I have never taught a single class that is either hybrid or online. I only choose to teach my classes in person. And some of you are thinking, well, that's because tech, you are ancient, you're old, you don't know how to use technology to teach classes online. Well, I'll leave it up to your imagination whether that is the case or not. But I think teaching in person is a whole lot more effective. How many times have you taken an online class and even with Zoom, everybody turned off their camera? That usually is what happens, right? So when I ask a question, and which we will get when we get into BNF, and I ask, so do you guys all know how to parse this input and formulate the syntax tree, blah 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 blah, okay? And in my experience teaching online, is I will hear nothing. Even if it's a Zoom session, it's live, it is synchronous, I would hear absolutely nothing. So how can I tell whether people are ready to move on to the next topic or they're going like, I'm really not getting the concepts? I cannot tell. In a class like this, most of the time people don't speak up anyway, but I can look at the expression of people in this class, okay? If I see faces like this, it's like being impatient, it's like, come on, let's move on to the next topic. I know I can proceed. When I see people going like, you know, there are certain kind of expressions that can let me know that okay, this concept is not quite explained yet. Okay, then I can kind of slow down, use another example or whatnot. So I think there is a lot of differences between teaching online and teaching in person, especially when the subject matter is going to be complex and also abstract. Okay, now if you think that's just me, Tack, you are making the class more abstract and more difficult and more complex than it has to be. I don't think that is the case. Do you know why I don't think that is the case? This also has to do with me being ancient. When I was a student in the computer science program, you guys go like, oh, here we go again. Tech is talking about the past again. We started off with CISP 400. That was the first computer science class. There was no CISP 300. There was no CISP 360. You start with CISP 400. So there's no way, okay, I can actually make this class more complicated and more difficult than it has to be. It is just not possible. Okay? So I really just want to put everything in context, because I think that's realistic. All right. So with all that said, okay, there are some additional resources here. You guys can look into it. You don't have to read it. This is a super catalog that I have written in terms of resources to help students to become more successful. Some of these talk about note-taking techniques. Some of these talk about, time budgeting. Some of these talk about time management and so on. Okay. So these are all the things that I think are important for people to succeed in college. If this is your first college level class or the first semester you're in the college, you might find these things useful, later on because you may not have experienced other college level classes. But anyway, this is optional reading. You do not have to read it. So I'm gonna move on and actually, I think, yeah, okay, I'm gonna move on. So this particular section talk says is computer science for you. These are tools so you can do some research and find out whether your interest and your aptitude and also and basically whether you as a person aligns with computer science, computer engineering, or whatever your major is going to be. So you might ask, why is that important? Can someone tell me why your personal interest, your aptitude are all important in terms of determining how successful you will be in the long run, in computer science, computer engineering, software engineering, and all the related fields? Yep, go ahead. That is correct, but I will rephrase it a little bit. You'll be trying very hard without noticing that you have been trying because it is fun for you. Okay? I'll give you a counter example of why, what is not going to work. So look at me. Imagine I'm in my teens, okay? Let's say 16 to 18, okay? And I go like, I want to be an NBA player. So would that be a good decision for me? Probably not, right? I'll be frustrated because, I can be dribbling, I can be very good at dribbling, and, you know, I don't even know the terms, right? But someone, who's, 6'8" only has to do this, and I don't have a shot anymore. Okay, so it's going to be a frustrating path for me. No matter how hard I try, that is not the right path for me. So I want to make that kind of, I don't want to discourage people, but there is something about this, okay, that is important. The next one is a Bureau of Labor Statistics student activity. It's basically an assessment to help you find out what you like to do, what you're good at, and so on. And it will help you find the right alignment of, oh, okay, these career paths are probably the most aligned with who you are. Okay, so that's kind of important. This is a list of occupations, so you can just kind of browse through it like a catalog. Okay, just kind of shop for a career path. So, so there we go. And now we move on to control structures, which is the overall name of this entire collection. But we are going to start with syntax and the syntax to describe syntax. I know that sounds kind of how should I describe it? It sounds kind of cryptic, okay? And that was intentional, okay? You will find that I would do something like this intentionally, quite frequently in my classes. All right, so we'll start with the basics, okay? And if you have questions about this, please do not hesitate to ask those questions. So do we have any questions before kind of diving into the details? No questions? Oh, I got one more thing to mention before I forget. This classroom is actually free on Mondays. So what I can do is to also have an in-person meeting that is optional on Monday at exactly the same time in exactly the same room. So I can actually have a live lecture face to face, okay, which will be recorded. So for people who cannot make it on Monday, it's no problem, okay, it'll be recorded so that everybody will have access to the actual live session. So if I make that option available, is anyone even considering, oh, maybe I'll just kind of stop by on certain Mondays for the real life interactive class? Okay, so we have some people who have expressed interest. I'm not asking for commitment. I'm simply asking, is it even worth doing? So it seems like it is worth doing. So I will try to arrange to have next Monday to have an in-person session in this classroom at exactly the same time. Okay, I will update you, once I find out whether it can be done, and then you guys can choose to show up or not to show up. Okay, it's up to you. But I think it is going to be more beneficial when we have I really prefer face-to-face contact, but I do understand, if you cannot make it on Monday because that's not on the schedule. All right, cool. Okay, so I have some idea now. All right, so the context. In other words, what is the reason for BNF? The reason why it is important is on your page to learn how to program, understanding and applying the syntax of a programming language is important because guess what? Now, I know I am an ESL person, so my English is not close to perfect. I make grammatical mistakes all day long, and when I'm writing, I also use the wrong punctuation marks all day long. Okay, commas, semicolons, that sort of thing. But for the most part, I would like to think that most people can understand what I'm talking about. Okay. That's because natural languages are kind of fuzzy. Okay. Your brain is kind of fuzzy. Okay. For the most part, you can kind of fill in the gaps and kind of get the general idea. Missing a punctuation mark is not going to be a big problem. When you are programming, on the other hand, it is a whole different thing. Okay? If you miss a punctuation, if you use a semicolon instead of a comma, it can change the meaning of something. If you use braces at the wrong places, it can change the meaning of your program. Okay? So in programming, precision of your syntax or the precision of what we see as grammar is super important, because if you use the wrong type of construct, it will not compile if you're lucky. In other words, the computer simply says, I don't understand what you're talking about. I cannot do what you asked me because I don't know what you're asking me. That is when you're lucky. When you're unlucky, then whatever you specify can be interpreted, but it will be a misinterpretation of what you intend. Then your program is not, it's going to compile. It's going to, the computer says, I understand what you're talking about, but it would be a misunderstanding of what you intend to do. Then the computer, the program is not going to do what you think it should do. It will do something else. Okay. That is the why of, you know, this is the reason why this module is important. Okay. Because computer programming language syntax are usually specified in BNF. Are we good so far? All right. So now we move on to the actual syntax. Okay. So we'll move on to. So I'm skipping a few things, because they are not the actual meat of the syntax itself. So right here we're going to take a look at the basics. So each syntactic rule, which is basically kind of like a grammar rule, consists of two parts: the token that is being defined, and what token it can expand to, or what string of tokens it can expand to. So we're going to take a look at an example here. So the token being expanded is called iteration dash statement. Okay. Now we're going to get to these later on in this class, but I'm using this as an example. What it can expand to would be one of these four alternatives. In other words, each one of these is an alternative to expand the token that we see as iteration dash statement. Is that okay? So when I said alternative, it means it can expand to something that starts with a while, something that starts with a do, something that starts with a for, and also something that starts with a for, but it is a little bit different, on the other part of that statement. So now you go like, but what about the font? Yes, go ahead. No, the tokens are not in the code. So the only thing you will find in the code would be something that looks boldface, but not italic. Those are called terminals. So the terminals are the things that can actually appear in your program. The tokens are more like for organization purposes. So in other words, we're trying to parse through a whole bunch of terminals that are actually in your program in order to reconstruct the structure of your code, and that is implied by a whole hierarchy of the tokens. Okay, so will use some examples to illustrate what that means, in just a little bit. Okay, but that is a good question. So, but this one is pretty complex as an example, so I'm not going to use it, to work out some examples in this class. Instead, I'm going to use, well, before we do that, I'm just going to summarize the alternatives to express a production or a rule, in terms of the grammar of a programming language. So in this case, a person can expand to the terminal of Johnny. So Johnny is a person. The same thing can also be expressed like this. So in this case, I do require, being able to use italic and also boldface, which may not be easy to do if you're working with plain text files. So if you're working with plain text files, then it is also okay to express a token like this, just spell out the name of the token, but all the terminals would be quoted. Okay, so in this case, Johnny is quoted because it's a terminal. There are some alternatives where it would use angle brackets to enclose a token, and then everything that is not a token, all the terminals would not be um, enclosed by angle brackets. So this one is a little bit less used these days because in HTML, angle brackets are also used for elements. So it can lead to some problems, some ugliness, using angle brackets. So for the most part in this class, I'll be either using the first one. If I can't have font control, I'll be using the first one. If I cannot, then I'll be using the second one, but they are equivalent. Do we have any questions about the two alternative ways to specify tokens versus terminals? No questions? All right. So without any questions about that, we are going to move on then to repetitions. So how do we express repetitions in syntax? In other words, how do I say something like, okay, here's an example. So this is an example of what can friends as a token be expanded to. In other words, what are the syntactically correct way to specify friendship between Ali, John, and Chang? That really is the question. And that question is why we have BNF, because we need to determine if I'm looking for, you know, several people who have friendships and I call that friends, what are the syntactically or grammatically correct way to specify a bunch of friends? Is that okay? So I just told you about the intent again, about why BNF is useful. It is for checking the grammatical correctness of an input string and see if it matches a particular construct specified by the language. Is that okay? All right. So now, this is one way to do it. R1, which is rule one, is simply saying your friend as a token can expand to Ali. The other way to look at this is Ali as part of the input can be recognized as quote unquote a friend being a token. Is that okay? So there are two ways, once again, there are two ways to look at each rule. You can read it like friend expands to Ali. You can also go the opposite way to say that Ali, as part of the input, can be recognized as friend. Are we good so far? All right. So these three are alternatives. R1, R2, and R3 are alternatives, which means Ali can be recognized as friend, John can be recognized as friend, Chang can also be recognized as friend. They are alternatives. The other two, okay, R4. So R4 is saying, oh, if there's only one person, that one single person can also meet the requirements of friends. In other words, that person just does not have friends, okay? Okay, that's one. But what if I want to express the friendship between more than, that actually has people, okay? This person is not a loner. Well, in that case, I have a recursive definition. A recursive definition means the token being expanded is going to expand to a sequence that has that token itself. Okay, so it looks kind of weird, right? Because now you have friends inside friends. How is that going to work out? So to understand that concept, you just have to look into how folders can be arranged. A folder can be empty, right? A folder can contain files, but a folder can also contain other folders. Is that correct? So please tell me that you have at least one time in your life created a folder that is inside another folder. Okay, not so good. See, this is what I mean by being in person is good because I can now go like, oh, okay, you guys understand what is a folder in a folder, a container in a container. A token in some way is like a folder. It's like a container. Okay, it's not strictly like that, but it is similar in some ways. All right. So R1 to R5 can be summarized into these two rules. So you can see the use of the vertical bar. The use of the vertical bar means they are alternatives. Okay, whatever is between the vertical bars are alternatives to each other. So in this case, Ali is and John and Chang are all alternatives to be recognized as friend. Yes, go ahead. Spaces are required to separate the input into multiple terminals. So, but the spaces are not a part of the syntax or the BNF representation. So spaces are implied to be used for chopping things into terminals. Yep. Mhm. Most programming languages that are C++ based would recognize line feed, which is the end of line, spaces, and tabs as basically the same thing. It's just a way for you to separate tokens or excuse me, to separate terminals. But this is also why I do not use Python, because you might know other friends, taking CISP 300 or 301 in the case of Sac City, and they say, "Oh, you guys are not teaching Python. What's wrong with your class?" Well, there's a reason why I'm not teaching Python in this class. What do you think that might be? Yes, that's okay. Yeah, it is not the same as C++. Yep, exactly. It's very different. I should not say it's not the same, because between C++, Java, JavaScript, even Rust, okay, they all share a whole lot in terms of the syntax specification, but Python is different, okay? Python is pretty much on its own. So the reason why I do not use Python has to do with why you're taking this class, but in a much more micro, scope. After this class, where are you going to go? What is the next class that you're going to take? CISP 360. Okay, you have to take 360 before 310. So, what is the programming language that they use in CISP 360? C++. Very good. So, if you only learn Python in this class and then you move on to CISP 360, you're going to have to relearn all the syntax. And I mean a lot, okay? Maybe not everything. The concepts stay the same, but the syntax is something that you have to completely relearn, because the way Python expresses structure is entirely different from the way C++ expresses, structure in terms of what is embedded into what. Okay, so that is the reason why I do not use Python here, because I don't want you guys to have to relearn a new syntax, because whoever is teaching P300 did not teach C++ syntax. Yes, go ahead. Yeah, I think it is a more effective use of your time, but people can disagree, because Python can be easier to look at from a certain perspective, but that's not going to help you in CISP 360. So, it's probably better just to front load, the effort, learn C++ syntax, even though it is harder, just from the get-go, instead of learning something that's easier, and then later on you have to relearn something that is actually hard, that you have to learn in any case. All right. So getting back to here. So that means in the other one, friends can expand to just friend itself, but it can also it can also expand to a sequence that consists of friends as a token and as a terminal, and then friend again as a token. So there are two ways to recognize a sequence of things into as friends. Are we doing okay so far? Basically the equivalency between R1 to R5, where we have individual rules, versus the kind of more concise way of expressing exactly the same thing. So do we have any questions about that? Yep, go ahead. It is okay. So the word recursive is not applied to the token itself, but the production, the rule that uses the token. So in the first rule, okay, let me scroll back up because R4 and R5 are good examples of what is recursive and what is not recursive. R4 as a rule is not recursive because friends is on the left-hand side, and we say it expands to just friend as a token, which does not mention friends itself on the right-hand side. On the other hand, R5 is a recursive rule because the token friends expands to a sequence which friends is part of the sequence of tokens slash terminals. So R5 is a recursive definition. R4 is not a recursive definition. So whether something is recursive or not is applied to the rule and not so much the tokens that are involved in the rule. Okay. All right. That's a very good question. I appreciate those questions. All right. So now the question is, if I give you a sequence, if I give you an input, okay, this is the input, John and Ali and Chang, how do I know this is syntactically correct as friends? That is the question. So it sounds like a pretty simple thing that I just said, but do we all understand what it means? Let me repeat the question. The task we have at hand is to answer the question of the input sequence of John and Ali and Chang. Does that meet the syntactical rules or grammatical rules in order for this entire thing to be recognized as friends, as a token? That is the question. We want to address that. So do we all understand what we need to do? Okay. All right. So I went back to my office to get my tablet because it is better for me to do this, on the tablet, so I can actually graphically show you, how things are done. So let me do a few things first because I first have to hook up to my own router because the school router does not allow devices to talk to each other on Wi-Fi. So I have to make sure that I'm using my own router, which it is. Okay, very good. And then the computer also has to use the same access point, so I have to make sure that is the case. Nope, not that. There we go. So I have to switch that first. Now it's using the same thing. Excellent. And now I have to create a notebook just for this class, which means, the notes is going to be available to you as well. Okay, but everything on screen is being recorded. So I don't think anyone is going to have to access the notebook itself. So I'm going to use horizontal format. That, yeah, just give me a little bit of time to type in 300 here. All right, create. Go. All right, so now I need to set up this sharing. Okay, so turn on screen share. It is. Now I have to type the IP address. 10, 36, 87, 28, colon, 8080. That's the URL corresponding to my tablet. Okay, and I say, this is actually important. It relates to what we are talking about. You guys go like, but this is networking stuff. This is not a networking class. Well, regardless of whether you're programming or understanding networking or URLs, they all have syntax. In other words, the way you specify an IP address that actually has a port specification, there are syntactical rules related to that. If you replace the commas, excuse me, if you replace the dots or the periods with commas, it's not going to work. If you replace the colon with a dash is not going to work. In other words, you are dealing with syntax all the time. Okay, just about anything that has to do with computers has to do with syntax. All right, and it complains, of course. All right, is that the right address? Okay, 10, 36, 87, 28 with the port of 8080. Okay, I did not make a mistake. Let me try something else. Sometimes it's a little stubborn and does not want to make the connection. So I need to ping it. Ping 1036 8728. Nope, doesn't like that. Okay, try one more time. Is this computer on the right network? Nope, it switched back to LRCCD, that's why. All right, so give me one more time. If this doesn't work, I'm going to have to use the whiteboard, which is also why it is helpful to be in a classroom. Yeah, it doesn't look like this is working. Might have something to do with the router. Okay, well, if it's not working, it's not working. I'm not going to spend too much time to diagnose a networking issue. All right. Well, it's not working, so we're going to have to kind of fall back to use the whiteboard, which means you might want to take some notes, okay? Because this is all kind of dynamic. Now, am I really requiring you to take notes? The answer is no, but we are all masters of our own destiny. I'm going to leave it at that. So I'm going to I'm lowering this because I don't want it to block the view of people in the back. All right, so we'll just go ahead and start with, this is not a really high contrast color. Let me see if they have anything higher contrast. There we go. All right, so I'm going to verbally describe as much as I can. So we have Ali, let's say, and Chang, and we'll go back to Ali. So even though it doesn't make sense from the semantic or the meaning perspective, I just need to know whether it is syntactically correct. Okay, so it doesn't really matter. So this is my input. So now the real question is, can this input be recognized as quote unquote friends in terms of the structure, in terms of the grammar, in terms of the syntax? That is the question. So what the computer is going to do is to look at all the rules and say, okay, what is going to match? When the computer first read Ali, it will basically say, okay, what can Ali be recognized as? So according to the rules, so let me switch back on the screen to the rules that are applicable in this case. So when the computer sees Ali, it goes like, hey, look at this rule here. Ali can be recognized as a friend. And there are no other ways to recognize the input Ali. So the computer goes like, oh, okay, this can be recognized as a token, which is friend. And it will keep track of that internal. Are we doing okay so far? Okay. And then the next word the computer is going to encounter is the word and. And the computer goes like, let me look up the rules. And they go like, well, and by itself is not going to be recognized as any token. So what it would do is to leave it alone. It would just remember there is a word and in the input that is following the token friend. Are we doing okay so far? Because the token friend is already recognized. So the word and is following the token itself. Okay. But the computer can also do one more thing that I forgot to mention, which is, well, given that we have a token called friend, can we recognize the token, the singular token friend, as something else? Well, let's check out the rules. So the rule says the token friend all by itself can also be recognized as the token friends. Now, is that going to be helpful? Not sure. Okay, so we'll just go ahead and do it, and then we'll go like, okay, if it is not useful, then it is not useful. We're not going to use that particular token, but the transition is possible according to the rules. Okay, I'm just going to pause here and see if there are any questions about the red portion on the whiteboard, which is how does the computer know that it can transition alley, which is part of the input, and say, hey, that's a token. And then it looks at the token friend and go like, hey, that token can also transition to friends also as a token. It is all based on the rules that we have specified. Is that portion okay? Okay. So, and then after that, it sees the word and, okay? And then the computer looks up all the rules and go like, not much I can do here, okay? The word and cannot be recognized as any token by itself, okay? So what the computer now has is, okay, I can see that there's a pattern of friend and something, but there's also a pattern of friends and something. At that point, you still cannot recognize anything. So the computer moves forward again, and now it sees the word Chang. Okay, it would do all the things and say, okay, what can I do about Chang itself? It looks up all the rules. The first one says, oh, you can recognize the word Chang as a token, which is friend. Okay, cool. Oh, that's supposed to be red. So it can recognize it as friend. And immediately now we have a sequence of three things that can also be recognized as something, a token. Okay, this is also why it is kind of important to do this with drawing and not so much with. I'm trying to look for something that's blue, but there's none. So green is going to have to do it. So now the computer says, I have a token friends, which also has an alternative of friend, but friends is the final form. I have a token and I also have a token friend that are sequential. So at that moment, the computer says, oh, look at these three things. This particular subsequence can now be recognized as friends, okay? But it's a higher level friends, not a singular level friend. So that means, ooh, this entire thing is going to be recognized as friends. It's a higher level friends that is containing the other friends, which is singular. Is that okay? All right. So that means these three words, okay, Ali and Chang, is now recognized as a single token of friends. We good so far? Okay. So now the computer moves forward, and the next word it sees is and. Okay. Not much you can do about that. Okay. Because according to the productions, and by itself doesn't do anything. Okay. And then it sees Ali. So when it sees Ali, it will do kind of the same thing. Okay. It will move on to, hey, I can recognize this as friend. Yeah, the computer says I can also recognize this as friends. But only one of these two is actually useful. Because once the computer realizes that it can transition to friend, Ali can transition to friend, and the friend can transition to friends, it will go like, but which one is more useful if I want to recognize the entire thing? Oh, if I want to recognize the entire thing, I got friends here, I got the word and over here, and I got friend over here. It matches the the recursive definition R5 of friends. So at this point, the computer goes like, oh, cool. This token combined with this word and combined with this token friend, this entire thing can now be recognized as friend or friends. Sorry, it's friends. Is that okay? So we do have a conclusion that this is the syntactically correct way to specify friends. Now, does it make sense to repeat Ali, twice? Okay, Ali appears twice in the word in the sentence. No, I guess not. Okay, but syntax is about sequencing, not about interpretation. So in terms of the syntax, in terms of the sequencing of the words, this works. Now, if you were to turn in your homework assignment in an English class and you specify multiple items that are actually the same in and, your professor may say, that doesn't seem to make sense and mark you down. But in terms of syntax, it's perfectly okay. There's no problem. Is that okay? So this class focuses, or at least at this point, this class focuses only on the syntactical aspect of things that you can specify in the program. Are we doing okay so far? Okay. So I think at this time it is probably reasonable to take roll. I do not have a roll sheet. I do not take roll that way. So instead, I'm going to raise this up again. And by the way, if you want to take a picture of this, you can just kind of wait until the end of the class or wait until I'm not in front of the whiteboard. Okay. Yeah, you can I promise I won't erase it. Okay, so you can take it later. So for now, we're going to take roll. And I have this activity here. Is you cannot see it yet. Okay, I have not make it viewable yet. So I have to change the start time because I originally planned to do this at a certain time, but it's not that time anymore. So I'll say it is the due date is. I'll give you guys like half an hour to do this. There we go. Save and publish. All right, so go ahead and log into Canvas and go to the class shell. The access code is here. So you do have to enter the access code of B and F, but in all lowercase. If you're using a VPN, you probably have to get out of the VPN and actually use the school network directly because of the IP filter. Yes, the access code is DNF. Yep. You should be on the network. Okay, I'll just get rid of the IP filter for now. That's because your phone is not hooked up to the school Wi-Fi. You're probably using your 4G or 5G. Yep. But I can see, I don't want you guys have to deal with it for now. So I'm gonna drop that requirement. Ah, Okay, try again now because I just removed the IP filter. Yep. Say again. That I knew somebody's gonna say that. No, no, because it does show that you have to be present to respond to the quiz, right? Yep. But I knew somebody's gonna say that. Every semester, somebody's gonna ask. So if I say I'm not present, is that gonna count as present too? Because I have to be present to say that I'm not present. All right. So for those of you who are done with this role taking activity, how many of you have done a personality assessment? MBTI, Big Five, Enneagram. Um, okay. So do you guys remember yours? No? Okay. It is actually kind of interesting. Um, in terms of studying, it is actually useful to know what your type is because what works for some people may not work for you. Okay, what works for certain types of people may not may work in the opposite manner for some other people. I know some people are still trying to get the role thing done, so I'm just kind of chit-chatting a little bit here. I am an INTP, okay, in terms of Myers-Briggs type indicator. So in my case, working in a group or studying as a group is not going to work for me because of the introverted, nature. So when other people are talking out loud, they're bouncing ideas off of each other, it I cannot hear my own thoughts, which is really important when I am studying. I need to listen, I need to hear my own thoughts. And I can work things out pretty much for the most part by myself, but I need that space and quietness, to do that. Extroverted people do not think like that. Extroverted people like to bounce off ideas. Okay, they need somebody else to be around in order to bounce ideas. Okay, so for those people, if they are to study by themselves with nothing to bounce off ideas, they will feel, really challenged. It's like, okay, I cannot do this. I need somebody to be sitting next to me so I can ask that person, even if that person cannot respond, I need to talk everything out. Okay. So that's why, the personality test, can actually be useful for you to find the best study strategy for yourself. Are you one of those people who can benefit from a study group, or do you need a space where nobody can bother you in the process? Right? So, kind of interesting. All right. So, we have another 15 minutes or so. What I'll do is I'm going to present this challenge to ChatGPT and ask ChatGPT the same question and see how it's going to answer that. Okay? So we'll ask exactly that and go like, with the input of Ali and Chang and Ali, does that get recognized as the friends, okay, token according to R1 to R5 of module, what was that module? 0440. Okay, we'll see what it means. Well, it actually does remember, it knows all those grammars because I uploaded all the material that you're supposed to be reading to ChatGPT. But it will give you the answer to. It doesn't give you a straight up answer of yes or no. Instead, it will explain the whole thing to you in steps. Okay, if you have questions about a particular step, okay, you can also just ask, okay, but how did you come to the conclusion that Ali and Chang as a substring is recognized as friends? So you can ask for clarifications. You can also ask general questions like, what is the difference between a token and a terminal? Okay, or you ask about the purpose of BNF. So everything that is in the notes, okay, that you're supposed to read is actually represented as knowledge files from the perspective of the GPT. But I do have to make one thing really clear. Your exams is going to be on paper using pencils, and no electronics is allowed. So do not get over reliant on ChatGPT. Use it to help you study, to understand what you need to know, but do not rely on it to do all the work. Is that okay? All right. So this is a general strategy that I think people should use, or you know, I would use. I shouldn't say people should. I would say I would use if I were a student. Okay. I have better tools with ChatGPT to help me study, to help me understand the material when the professor is not around, or when the professor is impatient. Okay, you guys are not. So, but it is an extra resource. Okay, so try to use it. Tell me what you think of it so I can improve it. Okay. All right. So with no further questions, we are going to move back to the example. So this is what we call a syntax tree. It is kind of like a folder tree, right? If you think about friends as a folder and friend also as a folder, it's kind of like a folder tree. So when we see, well, in this case, we have John and Ali and Chang, so it's a little bit different. So John is a file in a folder called friend. The folder called friend is a subfolder of friends as a subfolder, and is a file. This friend is also a file. So from the perspective of this, okay, I'm going to use a mouse pointer just so that when people watch this in the video, they know what I'm talking about. So from this level of folder structure is the perspective, we have friends. Then we have, oh, sorry, I take it back. We have friends as a subfolder. We have end as a file. And then we have friend again as a subfolder. Those three in this particular sequence is recognized as friends as a folder. This word end combined with this folder called friend is also once again recognized as friends. So this is kind of the analogy between tokens and folder structures. So I hope this helps you kind of you know get a better understanding of how this works, how BNF works. Do we have any questions? Yes, please. Well, you can only each of those words, okay? John, Chang, and Ali, each one of those words can only be recognized as a single friend token. So you cannot look at all of them to say, oh, they are all friends. In the process of parsing, when you see the word John, it becomes a token friend. And then later on, when we see the word Ali, it becomes another friend token. And then last, when we see Chang, it becomes the third token friend. Is that okay? Okay, cool. But this kind of syntax tree is difficult for you to draw because it relies on box characters. Okay, so most people do not know how to enter that on the keyboard. So to make it a little bit more structural and easy to, well, okay, easy in quotes to represent, I'm using this method here. So basically, when I use this method, it means this thing is recognized as this token here. This token is recognized as this token here. This token followed by this word in the input and then followed by this token here is recognized as friends here. And then this entire token combined with this word and combined with this simpler token here is also recognized as friends. In other words, this is a plain text representation of the very same structure that we have up here. It is just a different way of representing the same thing. For those of you who go like, I don't want to count parentheses, it's really hard to read when everything is on the same line. Well, you can always break it into multiple lines. Okay, so I'm not sure how this is going to be super helpful later on, but this is a way to represent what we call a syntax tree. The purpose of a syntax tree is to show you what is in what and what is following what. Okay, the ordering and also the structure of those things. Okay, those will become really important by the time we get to control structures. Are we doing okay so far? Okay, all right. So we are moving on. Okay, and this is the parsing graph, which is resembling what I just did on the whiteboard. It's just represented as a kind of like a picture. Dotted lines are recognition to token, and then the solid line has to do with the sequencing of the input of the words. Okay, so that's how you read this particular picture. All right, so I'm going to pause a little bit here, and I want to see what do you think? Well, I'm going to ask one question, and you do not have to answer the question. Okay. How many of you read the module and tried your best to understand the module prior to coming to class? Excellent. Okay. That is what you need in order to succeed in just about any STEM classes. Now, does that mean that people do not do that, who do not do that, are going to be automatically failing the class? No. If I were to take this class, I wouldn't have to study at all. I was just going to say that. Okay. But for if you're new to programming, if you have taken a few AP classes in high school, in programming in Java, you probably don't need to take notes either for the first few weeks. But if you're new to computer science and new to programming and new to all of this stuff here, it is really important to kind of study the notes. Okay, study my modules, write your notes, and in the class also jot down notes. Since we don't really have a whole lot of time to start a new module, let me just first show you what the next module is, just so that people know, okay, I'm supposed to be reading that. So the next module that we are going to go over is variables, assignment statements, and sequences. Okay, so this is going to be quote unquote your reading assignment. And it's also going to be the focus of next Monday's topic because, as I said a little bit earlier, I'm going to have an in-person session that is optional on next Monday. It'll be recorded, so people who cannot make it can still watch the recording. But this is what we will be talking about. Um, and then the next question is, as you are reading the module that we just covered, which is 0440, was it challenging? Was it difficult for you to grasp the concept? Sometimes you kind of have to think a little bit longer to get it. It's not just like it's not reading Harry Potter's. Okay, you actually have to pause and kind of think about it a little bit, chew on it, and then maybe half a day later you finally go like, yeah, I think I get it. Is that kind of your experience? Okay, I see some nods. Okay, and that's about where it should be. Okay, this class is not supposed to be easy. It's not supposed to be really hard. You do have to put in your effort. Okay, another question: what does it mean when you are taking a 3-unit class that is all lecture, which means this class? So what does it mean when we say, oh, this is a 3-unit class? What does that mean? Okay, let's look up the schedule. All of these are kind of important things to know, even though people don't tell you that. So we're going to look up ARC class schedule, and then we look up CISP 300 to be exact. Okay, and here is my class, and then we just kind of look this up. All right, so right here we can see, okay, it doesn't show 3 units, but it is 3. It says this class has 54 lecture hours. over the entire semester. That is part of what 3 unit means, is it has 54 lecture hours. Now, a class being hybrid or partially online, I don't even know how that counts. Okay, part of why this is part of why I do not teach online classes, which is how am I supposed to lecture and interact with my students when it's all online and asynchronous? Synchronous, I can sort of do it, but asynchronous, I have no idea how to do it. What counts as 1 hour of lecture when everything is asynchronous and online? I mean, you guys might, some of you must have taken online classes that are asynchronous and 100% online. So can you tell me what constitutes 1 hour of lecture? Exactly. Okay, that's exactly the reaction that I was anticipating. Anyway, back to this. So remember what I said. This is only a part of what 3 unit means because it is also implied that you have to, for every hour in lecture, for every hour that you listen to me yakking in the class, you're supposed to spend 2 additional hours on your own, possibly with a study group, to read the material, to revise the notes that you have been taking in class, to do the homework assignment, to come up with your own study guide, and so on. So that means for this class, over this entire semester, you should be allocating 108 hours outside of class time to do all the other stuff that you need to do. That is the expectation when we say, oh, this is a 3 unit class. That's the expectation. Is that okay? Now, does that mean you actually have to spend 2 extra hours, after class to actually get all the material? I do not know. I really cannot answer that question because it's all very individual. For some people, they get everything in class right away. They don't actually have to study. For other people, they might have to spend more than 2 hours to 1 hour. The ratio is not 2 to 1, it's a little bit more than 2 to 1. So that part is all individual. I cannot tell you how much time you will need in order to do this. Yes, question? Oh, you mean the road taking thing? Oh, you don't have your phone with you. Send an email to me, like right away, through your phone or through some other means, and then we'll deal with that. Hmm. Or I can take care of this. I cannot do it after class because I got another class right away. So just write me a note now, your physical note, and you'll have your student ID and your name, so I remember to mark you as present. All right. So do we have any other questions? Yes. Hmm? No, there's no book for this class because I think the syllabus might have mentioned that I provide all the reading material for this class. Have you read the syllabus? Well, hint, hint, yes. It is very important to read the syllabus because it shows you my expectations. Okay, um, and it's good to know. Now, whether you agree or not is a different thing. Okay, so the syllabus is supposed to just let you know about my expectations. You do not have to agree to the expectations, but the expectations still hold, okay, in this class. So so if you have not read the syllabus or read the modules, reading, please do so. There are many people who have told me that, Tack, the way that you explain things and write about things is really cryptic. It's hard for me to understand. Well, guess what can help you? Starts with a G or C. Yep, it's ChatGPT. Let me show you one nifty thing you can do with ChatGPT, and you guys are gonna like it. Okay, can you summarize module 0440 in a language that a 12th grade person can, without without any background in computer science can understand. Okay, maybe even ChatGPT has to think about this for a while. Yep, it's doing it. So use this as a resource, okay? Because as you are developing your reading comprehension skills, this is a way for you to bridge your current reading comprehension skill to the level that you actually need to succeed in your STEM classes. I am not the only person who write in this way, okay? So this is a way for you to bridge that particular gap is to use this and go like, oh, so that's what he meant when he wrote blah 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 blah. Okay. All right. Well, we are out of time today. I will see some of you next Monday. Remember, okay? I will try to arrange to have this room also next Monday. So we'll talk about the other module. But read ahead of time. Okay, that's always going to be helpful. And I'll try to do some online activities so that you guys get something to do before next Monday for sure. Hmm? Oh, next Monday is a holiday. You are correct. It is a long weekend, so it's going to be the Monday after that. Yes.